الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله اللهم علمنا ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا زدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وصلى الله على سيدنا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. Okay, so welcome to session 3 of our halaqah, reading Man and Allah's Justice on Earth, Imam Muhammad al-Buti, rahimahullah. So we pick up, if you have the translation in front of you, we're going to pick up on page 29. I think I touched on this a bit towards the end of the last session, but just to review and to do the chapter in full, we're going to pick up on page 29, and it's called The Secret Behind All of This, the secret behind why this world is a mixture of tribulations and blessings. So he starts off, he asks this question, he says, you might ask, why did Allah the Exalted want to load this worldly life with a mixture of good and evil, pleasure and pain, when he is able to adorn it with only the means of pleasure and make it free of distress and pain? So the question, to summarize that question, what it means is, if Allah can make paradise, why didn't he make this paradise? Right? Allah is perfectly capable of creating a world where there's no suffering, where no one is poor, no one is sick, no one is hungry, no one is struggling in any way, shape, or form. Allah can do that. But why not this life? Right? And the answer that should be obvious to a believer is that, well, that would make this world paradise. Then what's the point of paradise? Right? We have paradise, which is what Allah has called the Jannah, which is a place of absolutely no misery or suffering. And then you have the opposite, the fire, which is a place of nothing but misery and suffering. Whereas this world, you can see quite logically, is a mixture of both. It's not absolute pain and misery, but it's not absolute joy and bliss. And then he also makes this mention of the intellects. So we have an intellect, and we discussed this before, is the fact that we have an intellect and we have this ability to think and to plan the future, because this is our job. This, as Allah's khulafa on earth, we have this job where Allah's, or this wazifa, this sort of function, this duty that Allah's commanded us with, that he's entrusted us with, which is to build up the earth. In order to build up the earth, we have to be able to think about the future, and we also have to be able to study the past and to take lessons from the past. And this goes back to, I believe that I said this last time, the source of hem and huzn, because hem, and we make this dua every day. We make this dua about Allah to become min al-hammi wa huzn. Allah, I seek refuge in you from hem and huzn. You know, hem is this sort of grief, or we could say anxiety or worry, whereas huzn is grief and sorrow and distress. And like Imam Abdurrahman bin al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, in his book on Tibal Ruhani, he talks about how hem is connected to the future and huzn is connected to the past, right? So you might grieve over things in the past, or things in the past that maybe you regret, things about the past that trouble you, bother you, you wish you could change, you wish that had not happened. You might fall into that trap of saying, ya laytani, or well, lo fa'altu, if only I had done such and such, right? If only I had not spoken to so-and-so, if only I had not made that decision, such wouldn't have happened, which the Messenger of Allah said, don't do that, because you open the door for shaitan. Right? You open the door for shaitan's handiwork, and shaitan can come and mess with you, right? But then the flip side is the future, right? So the other thing about ham and husn, that we worry about the future, we worry about what Allah, or what will happen to us in the future. And this is why Allah has taught us, the Messenger of Allah has taught us, that we want to be focused on what Allah has commanded of us, and not to be preoccupied with what Allah has already guaranteed for us. Right, meaning that we want to be more focused on our worship and drawing near to Allah, and not stressed out about or overly stressed out about our risk and where we're going to get our provision from, and so on and so forth. Right, we want Allah to help us focus on what's been commanded of us, and not on what has already been guaranteed for us. Another way to look at it, there's a beautiful statement of Ali ibn Abi Talib, radiallahu anhu, qaramallahu wajha. Ali ibn Abi Talib, he said that you should prepare for your akhirah. Prepare for your akhirah as if you're going to die tomorrow. But prepare for your dunya as if you're going to live forever. Prepare for your dunya as if you're going to live forever, right? So because again, if you have that inverted, everything goes wrong. right? If you say, oh, well, I'm not gonna get myself qualified in anything, I'm not gonna learn a trade, I'm not gonna learn a skill, I'm not gonna learn anything because I could die tomorrow, right? Well, they're not gonna get anywhere. Whereas if you say, you know, I don't need to pray 5 times a day, I don't need to fast Ramadan because I could live, I'm a young guy, I've maybe got 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, I'll sort myself out later. No, switch it around. Make sure that in terms of your akhirah, you're prepared to die tomorrow. But for your dunya, you're prepared to live forever, right? Lay down foundations, work, study, put effort in, learn a trade, and so on and so forth. So this is why we had this intellect. It bears his burden. This was explained last chapter. And there's one point I'll make here. It says, why is perspicacity connected to life's adversity and afflictions, right? So it's like you cannot have ma'rifah. You cannot have ma'rifah unless you fully understand life's afflictions and trials and life's adversity. Now, perspicacity, I had to use this word because both ma'rifah and ilm are translated as knowledge. They've been translated knowledge, but the difference between ma'rifah and ilm, it boils down to two things. The Usuliyun, especially Sheikh Muhammad Hassan Hitu, the great Usuli of Damascus, in his book, Tariq al-Tashri' al-Islami, the history of Islamic legislation, he makes this point that there's a grammatical difference between ilm and ma'rifah. For example, you can say like alamtu anna kada kada, I know that something is something, which you don't do with the verb araftu, the verb arifa. So that's a grammatical difference. But in terms of meaning, Allah is never called al-arif. Allah is called al-alim. Allah is never called al-arif. Why? Because ma'rifah is a type of knowledge that is preceded by ignorance, right? Whereas ilm is a knowledge that's can be either. It can be preceded by ignorance or not preceded by ignorance, right? So Allah's knowledge is complete, and Allah's knowledge was never, na'udhu preceded by ignorance. Whereas when we talk about ma'rifah, this is a knowledge that is preceded by ignorance. Like it's an acquired knowledge. So Imam al-Buti goes on to give his answer is that in order to manifest absolute slavehood to him, this is what he discusses over the next couple of pages. In order to manifest absolute slavehood to Allah, because this is what you are Allah's slave. In order to manifest this absolute slavehood, there are two stations that are supposed to be manifested from you, which are patience and gratitude. Right? These are the two key stations, and you cannot have one without the other. So Allah wants to see patience from you in times of hardship, in times of difficulty, and then Allah wants to see gratitude from you in times of ease, in times of comfort, in times of blessings. This is how you manifest slavehood, and this is how again, because the Arabs have the saying, right? By opposites things are known. How would you even know what a blessing is if you haven't experienced hardship? How would you know what a hardship is if you haven't experienced a blessing? It's by opposites things are known, right? This is how we judge everything. We judge everything by comparisons. When you're going to buy a phone, buy a car, buy a house, or whatever it is you're going to buy, what restaurant you're going to go to, you're going to draw a comparison, right? You're going to know that that's a good restaurant because it's better than that one. Well, that's a good phone because it's better than that one, or it's an upgrade on that one. So by opposites, things are known. So he says here, by acknowledging the reality of the slavehood that is concealed in human nature, then coordinating and harmonizing between this reality concealed in his essence and the way he voluntarily conducts himself in life, man submits the meaning of this slavehood to Allah. So the point is, you've been brought into this world. You've been brought into this world against your will. That's the thing, right? You didn't choose to be born. You didn't choose to be created. But now that you're here, you have this choice. Now that you're here, you have this choice. Like Allah saying, you are my slave, but you have this choice. You can accept your slavehood and then act in accordance with that slavehood and therefore be grateful for your blessings and be patient with your tribulations. Or you can go into rebellion against it. Now you go into rebellion against it, it's not going to benefit you at all. And this is why I think we touched on this last time. When people ask like, okay, well, why did Allah do this to me? Why did Allah do that to me? People get into this sort of we might call a rebellious or recalcitrant stance towards Allah. Like, how could Allah do this to me? And this is the wrong question, because again, Allah says in Surah Al-Anbiya in the 21st chapter, verse 23, Allah says, La yus'alu, right? La yus'al amma yuf'al, right? Allah is not asked for what he does. Allah is not asked for what he does. And because Allah owns us, he created us and he owns us, he can do whatever he wants with us. And it's absolute justice because he owns us, right? Like if you have a piece of property, if I own a pencil and it's my pencil, if I want to break it in half, I want to throw it in the trash, that's my business because it's my property. I can do what I want with it. You can't say to me, oh, you're so unjust towards your pen. Well, it's my pencil. I'll do what I want with it. I'm not being cruel. I'm not being harsh. It's my property. Now, on the following page, he talks about this. He talks about this interesting point where someone might object and say, so why has Allah made me his slave and not put me in control of my own affairs so that I can do what I want? Sound logic has no answer to this objection other than direct him towards the owner of this relationship. So this is a question that kind of answers itself, right? It's like saying, what time does the 6 o'clock news come on? Okay, who says, why has Allah made me? Well, why has Allah made me his slave? Well, because Allah's made you. That's why. Why has Allah made me his slave? Because he's made you. He's made you, and you're not in charge of your own affairs. Why? Because you're created. How can you be in charge of your own affairs? You cannot do what you want. So he's made you. He's made you a slave, and he set up the system. There's no other way. There's no other way. This is how you've been created. This is the system that you've been placed in. This life, this abode that we're in, this dunya, is an abode of test, of trial and tribulation. There are blessings. There are tribulations. We have to have gratitude. We have to have patience, and then in the next life, the reward comes. So then the Imam, on the following chapter, he takes it to something very interesting. He talks about the source of commandments and hardships, and he goes into some that people don't, I would say, readily or intuitively understand. Something that people don't relatively or intuitively understand, which is the fact that a blessing as well can be a tribulation. And he explained what he means. So he says there are difficulties with which man is asked to be patient and steadfast with, and there are blessings regarding which man is asked to be grateful for and not completely immerse himself in. Okay, so this is on page 33. Now that's quite understood and quite straightforward. There are blessings that you do not, because with blessing, we don't want the blessings that we have, whether it's our wives, our husbands, our children, any wealth. We don't want those blessings to then go too far where we get distracted from Allah. This is what we don't want. And he says both of them come under the common denominator, right? Al-Qasim al-Mushtarak, the common denominator of life's hardships and difficulties. And he said, now you might think that's a bit weird. Like, okay, how can having a massive amount of wealth be a test? Like if I were a millionaire or a billionaire, how could that be a test? How could that be a trial? Right? How can that be harder than being poor? And so on and so forth. Or even you could say, and I don't think he mentions in this chapter, but he says, for example, even if how can being healthy, for example, how can being young and healthy be more of a tribulation than, say, being sick or being incapacitated? And what he goes on to explain is that when you have blessings, when you have blessings compared to when you're in a state of hardship, is the responsibility upon you is even greater to watch yourself. So the difference is, if two people, we can have two people who don't sin. We have person A, person B, and neither of them commits a sin. But the difference is person A doesn't have the capacity to sin, right? Because he can't afford to, right? He doesn't have the money to go clubbing. He doesn't have the money to mess around with prostitutes. He doesn't have the money to commit all kinds of horrible actions. He doesn't have the money to. Whereas you can have someone else who does have the means, right? They could easily do it, and they could easily do it secretly, right? They could easily commit all these sins. They could do it behind closed doors. You would never know about it. It's easy for them. But then this individual, with all the, he holds back. Which person is in a harder situation? It's the one who has the means, right? His test is a greater test, because if he wants to, he can easily do it and get away with it. in terms of from a human perspective, right? He can commit all these sins. He can spend the money. He can cover it up. It can be in private. No one will know. Whereas with the person who simply doesn't have the means, he doesn't have that tribulation, right? It's the same thing with, and you can think about so many blessings that Allah has given us, but they're blessings, but they're also tribulation, right? So you can think of someone who's blind. Someone who's blind is never going to commit the sin of looking at something that he shouldn't look at. That's the thing. Someone who's blind will never ever commit the sin of looking at something they shouldn't look at. Whereas if you're a sighted person and you're blessed with eyesight, you have to be careful, right? You can easily commit a sin of looking at something they shouldn't look at. The same would apply with someone who's deaf. Someone who's deaf is never going to commit the sin of hearing something that he should never hear, listening to something they should never listen to. Whereas people who have sight, have hearing, will fall into that trap. So how we show gratitude, as the Imam says on page 34, it says gratitude is not something, it's not merely moving the tongue in praise. Right? So this is the thing that, yes, we want to say alhamdulillah wa shukrulillah wa nahmadullah wa nashkuruhu. We want to thank Allah on the tongue. That's also beneficial, but the practical application of it is to use all these blessings that Allah has given us for what Allah has created us for. So we want to use the blessings that we have, whether it's hearing, sight, money, health. We want to use all these things to draw closer to Allah. So we want to use these. So if we have the ability to see, the ability to hear, we want to use that to study, to read, to read the Quran, to study fiqh, to teach other people. We want to use those blessings to see Allah's blessings. Maybe that would help us when we go to the masjid. Will help us when we go to for Hajj, for Umrah, to visit Medina, all these other places. We want to use those blessings. If we have wealth, we want to use that for sadaqah. We want to put that towards good cause. We want to put that towards awqaf. We want to put that towards a beneficial projects that other people are engaged in. We want to help out. This reminds me of a story. I remember I read this. This is going back maybe 15 years ago. A story of. Now this gives you an example of being appreciative of blessings. Like this was a young man. He's living in Bahrain. He's a young man in Bahrain, and he had some sort of illness that meant that he spent his entire life in bed. Like he couldn't actually get up from his bed, and on his bed he actually had a machine that was attached to him that kept him alive. So his whole life was sort of spent in bed in a sort of upright position, and there was a machine that would basically keep his body functioning, right? Allow him to breathe, allow his blood to flow, and so on and so forth. And he also had to do all his prayers on his bed. He's not well enough to fast, obviously, because he's constantly being fed. I think actually, I don't even know if he could swallow. I think he had to have maybe like an IV drip, but that was his life. That's basically his life. So again, he's not mobile. He can't walk. He can't go anywhere. He's just on his bed. And then some people visited him. Some people visited him. I think it was some like local sheikhs or something. Some tulab, and they went and they visited him, and they asked him, and they spent the day with him. They asked him some questions and stuff like that. And they said to him, like if you were healthy, right? If you were healthy, like you could walk, your normal functions, you could do all these other things. If you were healthy, what's the thing you would do? What's like the number one thing you would do? Like if you were, what's the number one thing you would do? And when they asked this question, he started crying, like his eyes filled with tears. He started crying, and he said, "Wallahi, I would just go to the masjid, because that's what I can't do. I would just go to the masjid, and I would be in the Jama'at. I would be with the believers. I could hear the Imam directly. I could do sujood. I could do ruku. I could do all these things. I can't do them. See, that's hard to describe. That's a patience with a blessing. That's a patience with a tribulation. And he's not saying, if I was healthy, I'd go to Disneyland. right? Or if I was healthy, I'd go out and I'd go surfing. I'd try other things. I'd travel the world. He's like, no, I just want to be in. I would just want to be in the masjid because I would enjoy that blessing. So that's a reminder to the rest of us, right? We're healthy. A lot of us, especially the men, we're like, if you're young and you're healthy and you have that ability to go to the masjid, like that's a blessing that there's certain people in this world that they can't enjoy because they don't have the health, they don't have the means. So take advantage of it. So that this is a lesson in gratitude. It's like I was watching a video just the other day by what's his specialty? I think he's some sort of neuroscientist, but he made this he made this point about dopamine and serotonin, right? Whereas like dopamine, like this dopamine hit that you get, dopamine is attached to when you acquire something new, right? You meet some sort of challenge, like there's something you want and you go out and get it, like you want a certain food or you want a certain achievement and you go out and you get it. And then it gives you this high, you feel really great for a little while. And then after a while it goes down, right? You come down off that high horse, like, oh, okay, right? Whereas serotonin is different. Serotonin gives you this kind of happy feeling in the sense that that results from when you actually acknowledge what you already have, right? Like you instead of thinking about, oh, I want something else that's external, you sort of sit back and think, subhanAllah, look at my life. I actually do have some good things. I actually do have, I have my family, I have my faith, I have a job, I have a house, I have this. There's little things that come together that make you grateful. So, so as a more practical thing, if we're talking about, yes, using all of Allah's blessings, all the blessings Allah has given you for what Allah has created you for, and not using them for the haram, using them for the halal, using them for the mandub, using them for the wajib, for that which is recommended or that which is obligatory. But you could also throw in there, and I would say this now, I speak from experience on this, another way to sort of do it at a cognitive level, right? And this especially works if you find that you're saddened or you're burdened or burdened by something, is to do what's called the gratitude list, right? So if you take every day, just take a pad of paper and a pencil. And it's better if you do it like this. It's better if you do it with pen and paper as opposed to on your phone, right? There's more meaning to it if you do it with a pen and paper. Oh, mashallah, say Jalaluddin is demonstrating for us. Are you? Okay. But if you take a pen and paper and on a daily basis, just write down 10 things that you're grateful for. Like before you go to bed, like think about your day and think about like 10 things that happened to you, or 10 good things that you can be grateful for, right? Now at the beginning, there's the obvious ones, right? You might write down, okay, my faith, my family, my job, my income, my studies. There's things that should be obvious, that are obvious that you write down. But then as the days go by, you start thinking about all these little things like, oh yeah, so-and-so held the door for me. So-and-so smiled at me. So-and-so got me a cup of tea at the office. So-and-so made way for me while I was, some stranger I don't even know let me pass in traffic, something like this. And you start seeing all these good things happening, because again, it's all about focus, right? Remember that there's the hadith in Bukhari, I think it's on the authority of Anas ibn Malik, where it's a hadith Qudsi, where the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam quoted Allah as saying, "Ana inda dhanni abdi bi," I am as my slave sees me. So if you start focusing on the good things in life, on the blessings, and you start enumerating them, you start writing them down and seeing, you see that, and then you see more. Because again, you take that hadith and then you cross-reference that with Surah Ibrahim, the 14th chapter, verse 8, where Allah says, "La'in shakartum lazidannakum." If you're grateful, I will increase you. So by doing a simple list like that, you start becoming more and more aware of the blessings in your life. And in your heart, you're thanking Allah for these blessings, and the blessings stand out. And the thing is, the tribulations are still there, right? The tribulations never go away, but your capacity to deal with them is so much stronger. Why? Because you're thinking about the good things that Allah has given to you. You're thinking about those good things, and therefore the tribulations lessen, and therefore you stop sort of dividing your life into like good days and bad days. Instead, every day is a good day. Every day is a good day because of the good things that happen in it. And you also remember that Allah is your creator, Allah is your Lord, Allah is in charge of all of this. Allah is in charge of all of this. And it's not to harm you in any way. So again, the Imam goes on in this chapter, and he talks more about how, you know, people can be tested with wealth and tested with poverty. And again, he talks about how, this is on page 34 and 35, someone can be tested very much with someone who has a lot of wealth or a lot of ability to commit sins. They're going to be tested more. This individual will be tested more than someone who has does not have wealth or does not have the ability to commit sins. Right? They're simply not there. Okay, and they might the person who does not have the ability could get sin, could be taken into account, because they might have that intent. They think, oh man, if I had that money, I would do that. You see, right? And the fact that so think about it. If someone is in that situation where they say, oh man, if I had that wealth, I would do that, and it's something sinful. The fact that they do not have the wealth is actually a blessing, right? Allah has deprived them of the means to commit the sin, and that in and of itself is a blessing. That's a beautiful thing, because Allah knows. Allah knows what you or I might do with a type of blessing if we had a certain type of money, right? Because again, I remember one of my teachers gave a khutbah, and he said, you know, you might be there making dua saying, oh Allah, give me that new jet ski. I really want that jet ski, right? But Allah knows that if you were given that jet ski, you might hurt yourself, right? You might have some horrible accident, something like that. Well, so Allah doesn't give it to you, okay? And again, that this goes back to, you know, we're talking about slavehood, we're talking about gratitude. Again, we have to understand that Allah knows what is khair for you. Allah knows what is khair for you. Again, I have a video on my channel. Imam Muhammad Sha'arawi was explaining this, and he was talking about Surah Al-Baqarah 186, right? It's talking about if my slaves ask you about me, I am near. And he talks about, you know, the beautiful thing about dua to Allah, and he cross-references that with Surah Al-Baqarah 216, where Allah talks about khair and shar, right? And something, you might love something, but it's actually shar for you. It's actually evil for you, but you might actually hate something, and it's khair for you. You hate something, but it's you hate something, but it's actually good for you. And Allah knows and you don't. Wallahu ya'lam antum la ta'lamun. Allah knows and you don't know. So putting this all together, so he says that when so Imam Sha'arawi, he says when you make dua, if you boil it down, the fundamental thing that you ask for Allah, when you're making dua, the fundamental thing that you ask for is that you ask for khair. That's what you're asking for. That's the fundamental thing that you're asking for, right? You might ask, oh Allah, give me this job. Oh Allah, give me some kids. Oh Allah, give me this position. Oh Allah, give me that raise. Oh Allah, give me the, you know, let me marry so-and-so. But why are you asking for these things? You're asking for all these things. Why? Because you think there's khair in them. That's why you're asking for them, right? That's what all boils down to is khair. But the point is that Allah knows what is khair and what isn't, right? So he said, so he said, you can't really say that Allah doesn't answer your dua. Oh, Allah doesn't answer. I've been asking this thing. Allah doesn't answer my dua. No, because what you're asking for in your dua essentially is you're asking for khair. If Allah didn't give you that thing, it's because there's khair in it. That's why. So Allah is still giving you. Allah has still answered your dua, but Allah is going to give you that khair in another way. Because you thought that thing was khair, you thought that job or that person or whatever it was, you thought that thing was khair, but actually it wasn't. So Allah held it back from you, right? Because Allah knows and you don't. Again, so Surah Al-Baqarah, 2nd chapter, verse 216. Now, as a final point, and this is on this point, those who do not understand these words. Again, so in this chapter. And I'll just talk about this briefly because we can, again, go into this in more detail in the next session. But in this chapter, he talks about, again, people who do not understand this and people who think that, and especially there's some people who are, again, not Muslim. It could be some Muslims, but again, against people who are not Muslim, who are going to think that, you know, what's wrong with being tested with wealth? What's wrong with being tested with good looks? What's wrong with being tested with health? What's wrong with that? Because Is that what we all want? And it's like, you haven't fully understood this. So he says someone someone who does not fully understand this, they might say, and they might mock, and they say, let Allah distance me from the causes of harm and hardship, harm and poverty. Then let him test me with the adversities of wealth and riches as he wants, regardless of whether I fail or pass or fail the test. Right? And I believe I translate as God here, because usually there's going to be a person who's not Muslim would say this, right? Let God distance me from the cause of harm and poverty. Then let him test me with the adversities of wealth and riches as he wants, regardless of whether I don't care whether I pass or fail the test. I just want to be rich. Right? And again, and people don't, again, there's something that is not fully understood in the West. Like, it can be a tribulation because I don't know, and I don't know what the situation is like in Singapore or Malaysia, but I don't know if it does exist, this thing called, well, I hope it doesn't. If you have a lottery, right? Do you guys have lotteries? Because again, in the UK, I've seen this many times. You have this lottery system where someone will go from being, an average, very average person. They work like a 9-to-5 job. They might earn, 30,000 pounds a year or something like that, right? 20,000 pounds, a very simple job. And then they win the lottery, right? They win like 20 million pounds or something, or 30 million pounds, like some stupid amount of money, right? And then what happens, right? So people think, oh, wow, this is a great blessing. I never have to work again. I can pay off my mortgage. I can pay off this, blah, 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 blah. And what happens, especially if it's a couple, this is sad, especially if it's a couple, what happens is, give it a year, this same person will end up broke and divorced, right? All the money's gone. The family's broken down, right? All the friends, right, that this person thought were friends, they've all gone now, right? And this person's in a state of misery because they didn't see that this was an actual hardship or a trial. They thought, well, this is just a blessing, right? I've just won 30 million pounds or $30 million. I'm never going to suffer again. I'll never have any more difficulties. I'll be able to pay for everything. If I have any health problems, I'll just pay for it. But then all these temptations creep in. People tell you, oh, you have all this money. Well, now you got to buy a private jet. Now you have to buy a mansion. Now you have to travel the world. Now you have to do this. Buy this, buy this, buy this, buy that, buy that. Enjoy yourself, right? And then, lo and behold, all the money's gone. And this person ends up broke. These people actually end up in a worse state than they were in before. So, and then the relationships break down, marriages break down, friendships break down, relationships with other family members break down. And so this supposed ni'mah, this blessing of having a massive wealth, actually turns into a horrible trial and affliction. So this is where people, where they go wrong, when they misunderstand. So this chapter is something we can look at next time, but I will just draw on one last point here, which is a beautiful point, because when we're talking about patience and we're talking about gratitude, again on page 40, but I'll pick up on this next time. But as a sneak peek, Imam al-Buti says, what is patience? He says, patience in truth is nothing more than attaching hope to some expected good. All right, there always has to be, so in all times of hardships, that's essentially what patience is. So whatever difficulty, whatever hardship you're going through, patience is the expectation that eventually something good will happen in this life or the next life, and that's what gives you that's what gives you patience. And this is something that, inshallah, we will talk about in far more detail next time, inshallah, next month. And with Allah alone is our success. Walhamdulillah, ala rasulillah.